Genesis chapter 30. And Rachel sees that she has not borne to Jacob, and Rachel is envious of her sister and says to Jacob, "Give me sons, and if there is none, I die." And Jacob's anger burns against Rachel, and he says, "Am I instead of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" And she says, "Behold, my handmaid Bilhah, go into her, and she bears on my knees, and I am built up, even I, from her." And she gives Bilhah her maidservant to him for a wife, and Jacob goes into her, and Bilhah conceives and bears a son to Jacob. And Rachel says, "God has decided for me, and has also listened to my voice, and gives a son to me." Therefore she calls his name Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, conceives again, and bears a second son to Jacob. And Rachel says, "With wrestlings of God have I wrestled with my sister. Indeed, I have prevailed." And she calls his name Naphtali. And Leah sees that she has ceased from bearing, and she takes Zilpah, her maidservant, and gives her to Jacob for a wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bears a son to Jacob. And Leah says, "A troop is coming," and she calls his name Gad. And Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bears a second son to Jacob. And Leah says, "Because of my happiness, for daughters have pronounced me blessed." And she calls his name Asher. And Reuben goes in the days of wheat harvest, and finds love apples in the field, and brings them to his mother Leah. And Rachel says to Leah, "Please give to me of the love apples of your son." And she says to her, "Is your taking my husband a little thing, that you have also taken the love apples of my son?" And Rachel says, "He therefore lies with you tonight for your son's love apples." And Jacob comes in from the field at evening, and Leah goes to meet him and says, "You come in to me, for in hiring I have hired you with my son's love apples." And he lies with her during that night, and God listens to Leah, and she conceives and bears a son to Jacob, a fifth. And Leah says, "God has given my hire, because I have given my maidservant to my husband." And she calls his name Issachar. And Leah conceives again, and she bears a sixth son to Jacob. And Leah says, "God has endowed me a good dowry. This time my husband dwells with me, for I have borne 6 sons to him." And she calls his name Zebulun. And afterward she has borne a daughter, and calls her name Dinah. And God remembers Rachel, and God listens to her, and opens her womb. And she conceives and bears a son, and says, "God has gathered up my reproach." And she calls his name Joseph, saying, "Yahweh is adding to me another son." And it comes to pass, when Rachel has borne Joseph, that Jacob says to Laban, "Send me away, and I go to my place and to my land. Give up my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and I go. For you have known my service which I have served you." And Laban says to him, "Now if I have found grace in your eyes, I have observed diligently that Yahweh blesses me for your sake." He also says, "Define your hire to me, and I give." And he says to him, "You have known that which I have served you in, and that which your substance was with me. For it is little which you had at my appearance, and it breaks forth into a multitude, and Yahweh blesses you at my coming. And now, when do I make I also for my own house?" And he says, "What do I give you?" And Jacob says, "You do not give me anything. If you do this thing for me, I turn back. I have delight, I watch your flock. I pass through all your flock today, to turn aside every speckled and spotted sheep from there, and every brown sheep among the lambs, and speckled and spotted among the goats. And it has been my hire. And my righteousness has answered for me in the day to come, when it comes in for my hire before your face. Every one which is not speckled and spotted among my goats, and brown among my lambs, is stolen with me." And Laban says, "Behold, oh, that it were according to your word." And he turns aside during that day the striped and the spotted male goats, and all the speckled and the spotted female goats, every one that has white in it, and every brown one among the lambs, and he gives into the hand of his sons, and sets a journey of 3 days between himself and Jacob. And Jacob is feeding the rest of the flock of Laban. And Jacob takes to himself a rod of fresh poplar and almond and plane tree, and peels in them white peelings, making bare the white that is on the rods, and sets up the rods which he has peeled in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks come to drink, in front of the flock, that they may conceive in their coming to drink. And the flocks conceive at the rods, and the flock bears striped, speckled, and spotted ones. And Jacob has parted the lambs, and he puts the face of the flock toward the striped, also all the brown in the flock of Laban. And he sets his own droves by themselves, and has not set them near Laban's flock. And it has come to pass, whenever the strong ones of the flock conceive, that Jacob sets the rods before the eyes of the flock in the gutters, to cause them to conceive by the rods. And when the flock is feeble, he does not set them. And the feeble ones have been Laban's, and the strong ones Jacob's. And the man increases very exceedingly, and has many flocks and maidservants and menservants and camels and donkeys.